The chains were not heavy. That was the first thing I noticed. They wanted me to feel small, not restrained. There is a difference, and the V3 understood it perfectly. A heavy chain says we fear you. A light one says we do not even think you worth the metal. My name is Ellis Grant. I am 63 years old. I spent 31 of those years charting the edges of known space for the Human Survey Corps, and the last 4 living quietly on a small station near the outer veil with a broken navigation console, a box of old photographs, and absolutely no intention of becoming a symbol. That plan did not work out. The cell they put me in was made of clear composite material. Every wall was see-through. Not because they were watching me, though they were, but because they wanted me to watch them, to see the size of their ship, the number of their soldiers, the gleaming certainty of their power. It was meant to reduce me, to make me feel like an insect pressed between 2 sheets of glass, observable, categorized, completely without consequence. I watched them back. The V3 were tall. Most of them stood close to 9 feet, with smooth crystalline plating running from their shoulders down their arms, refracting the ship's interior light into cold blue patterns on the walls around them. They moved with the quiet confidence of a species that had not lost a war in 400 years. Their ship, which they called the Sovereign Reach, was enormous, 3 kilometers long by my estimation. The hull was dark and seamless, with weapon arrays spaced at intervals that told me whoever designed it had thought carefully about overlapping fields of fire. I noted all of this quietly, without moving from the bench they had given me. A guard came to bring me food on the first cycle. The food was a pale block of something compressed and odorless, clearly designed for basic biological sustenance rather than any kind of comfort. The guard set it down without looking at me. He was young by the posture, trying very hard to appear as though he was not curious. I said nothing. He left. I ate the food because I was hungry and because a person who does not eat cannot think clearly, and thinking clearly was the only advantage I had left. On the second cycle, a different figure came. Not a guard. He was taller than the others, broader, with a ridge of darker crystalline plating along the top of his head that caught the light differently. He wore a long outer garment in deep gray with gold markings at the collar. He stopped outside my cell and looked at me the way a person looks at something they have already decided is unimportant but want to confirm. "You are the human," he said. His translator unit rendered his voice into flat, serviceable English with a slight mechanical delay. "I am **human, I said. "There are roughly 40 billion of us." He tilted his head. The motion was slow, deliberate, and entirely dismissive. "You were found alone in a disabled vessel with no weapons and no functioning communication array. I was on a survey mission. The drive gave out 3 weeks ago. I was waiting for a repair drone." Waiting. He repeated the word as though the concept itself was faintly ridiculous. "I had food and water for another month. I was in no particular hurry." He studied me for a long moment. Then something shifted in his expression, something that might have been amusement if his face had been built for it. "I am Commander Thriel. This is my vessel. You are my prisoner." He paused. "Do you understand what that means?" "It means you found me first," I said. He left without another word. But he told 2 of his officers about the exchange, because 20 minutes later I could see them through the composite wall, looking in my direction and making gestures that needed no translation. They were laughing. Good. Let them laugh. A laughing enemy is a comfortable enemy, and a comfortable enemy stops paying attention. On the third cycle, something changed. The ship dropped out of its transit speed. I could feel the shift in the vibration under my feet, a subtle change in the hum of the engines, the kind of thing you only notice after decades of living on vessels of various sizes. We had arrived somewhere. Through the outer wall of my cell, past 3 corridors and a wide observation port, I could see a planet, large, green and brown, 2 small moons in close orbit. They were broadcasting something. I could not hear it from inside the cell, but I could see screens activating along the corridor walls, and I could see V3 soldiers stopping to watch them. Their posture changed when they watched. They stood straighter, the way beings stand when they are being observed and want to look like what they believe they are. A ceremony was coming. Thriel returned 4 hours later. This time he brought 6 officers with him, and he was carrying himself differently, more deliberately. He was performing for someone now, not just speaking to me. "You will be presented to the Dominion High Assembly," he said. "A live broadcast across 47 systems. You will stand before the assembly chamber and answer questions about your species. It is a gesture of openness on the part of the Dominion." I looked at him steadily. "And if I decline?" The 6 officers exchanged glances. Thriel's expression did not change. "You will not decline." I thought about that for a moment. A live broadcast. 47 systems. Every major species in the Dominion watching a single old human in a see-through box on the Empire's flagship. "All right," I said. "I will answer their questions." He had expected resistance, or fear, or at least some visible discomfort. He got none of those things, and it unsettled him just slightly. I could see it in the brief pause before he turned to leave. I spent the remaining hours before the broadcast sitting on my bench, eyes closed, running through everything I had observed in 3 cycles aboard the Sovereign Reach. The guard rotations, the structural joints where the composite plating met the inner hull, the power conduit channels that ran along the ceiling of the corridor outside my cell, the direction of the officer quarters relative to the assembly chamber, which one of the younger guards had mentioned by name to another without thinking. I counted what I could see. I catalogued what I could hear. I filed everything in the same quiet corner of my mind where I had kept survey data for 31 years, and I let it sit there, organized, ready. They were going to put me in front of the galaxy and show everyone how small humanity was. I had a different idea about what that broadcast might accomplish. Thriel came back with a formal escort at the appointed hour. 2 soldiers flanked me as the cell door slid open. The light chain at my wrist clanked softly. We walked down 3 corridors and into a lift. As the lift rose and the ship hummed quietly around me, I did one last thing before stepping into the light. I smiled, not for them, for myself. Because they had given me a window and a broadcast and an audience of 47 systems. Old survey pilots do not scare easily. We go into the dark alone with equipment that sometimes fails, and we come back with data. That is the whole job. You observe, you record, you bring it home. I had a great deal to bring home. The doors opened. The assembly chamber was enormous, ringed with tiered platforms where V3 officials sat in ranked rows. Above them, panels displayed the live feed from cameras positioned throughout the room. Hundreds of V3 faces, and behind them on every screen, the wider galaxy watching. I walked in without being pulled, without stumbling, without looking anywhere but straight ahead. Thriel stepped to the elevated platform at the chamber's center and raised one arm for silence. The room went immediately, completely quiet. He had that kind of authority, the kind you do not argue with. "Citizens of the Dominion," he said, his voice carrying easily through the chamber's acoustics. "What you see before you is a representative of the species known as humanity. They call themselves explorers, pioneers, builders of civilizations." He paused, letting the words sit for a moment. "We found this one alone, drifting in a broken ship at the edge of nowhere." The chamber stirred, not quite laughter, something more refined, polite contempt. I stood in the center of the chamber floor and waited for it to pass. Thriel turned to me. "Tell the assembly," he said, "what humanity has achieved." I looked up at the cameras. I looked at the rows of V3 officials. I looked at the broadcast screens carrying our faces to 47 systems. Then I began to talk. and I chose every single word with the care of a man who knows exactly where he is standing and exactly what is at stake, because they had made one very significant mistake. They had given me the microphone. No living being in that chamber had spent 3 decades alone in deep space. No one in those ranked rows had navigated by dead reckoning through unmapped nebula, eaten recycled protein for 8 months straight, fixed a failing life support system with a wire, a thermal patch, and an unhealthy amount of stubbornness. They had not done those things because they had never needed to. The V3 Dominion was powerful. When you are powerful enough, you stop learning how to survive and start learning how to rule. Those are very different skills. I had spent my life learning how to survive. Thriel had positioned me on a small circular platform in the center of the chamber floor, raised maybe half a meter above the rest of the room, so everyone could see me clearly. It was designed to feel like a stage. I recognized it for what it actually was, an interrogation platform dressed in ceremony. I had been on worse. The questions began formally, delivered through an appointed speaker, a senior V3 official in pale robes who read from a prepared list with the expression of someone performing a duty they found mildly distasteful. "Describe the structure of human government," the speaker said. I took a breath. "We do not have one," I said. "We have several hundred national governments, planetary councils, system alliances, independent station charters. Some of them agree with each other. Most of them argue constantly." The speaker paused. He had not expected that answer. "You have no central authority." "We have the Colonial Assembly. It coordinates defense and resource distribution, but it cannot override planetary law. Every world governs itself." A murmur moved through the chamber. I heard the word fragmented spoken by someone in the third tier, and I did not correct them, because from where they were sitting, fragmented was exactly what it looked like. "Describe your military capacity," the speaker said. This was the question I had been waiting for. I kept my expression neutral. "The Colonial Defense Force maintains a standing fleet of approximately 4,000 vessels across all human space, ranging from patrol corvettes to heavy cruisers. In addition, each major colony world maintains its own defense militia, and the Titan yards produce roughly one new capital ship every 11 days. The murmur in the chamber changed quality, harder to read now, less confident. Thriel, standing to my left, leaned slightly toward one of his officers and said something quiet. The officer brought up a data pad and began scrolling through it. I continued. "We also have the Reserve Activation Protocol. In the event of a declared emergency, every human citizen between the ages of 18 and 55 with prior service experience can be recalled to active duty within 90 days. That is approximately 900 million people." The chamber was quieter than it had been. The speaker looked at his list. He seemed to be reconsidering the order of his questions. "You speak of military resources with a great deal of familiarity for a survey pilot." "I spent 6 years in the Colonial Defense Force before I transferred to the Survey Corps. Navigation officer. I know the fleet because I served in it." Thriel moved. He stepped forward and addressed the chamber directly, cutting off whatever the speaker had been about to say next. "These numbers are unverified," he said, his voice carrying easily. "A single prisoner's claim is not intelligence, it is noise." He looked at me with the steady certainty of a man who has never been seriously challenged. "Humanity is a young species, fractious, divided by its own history of internal conflict. Whatever resources you claim to possess, you have spent centuries directing them against each other." He turned slightly to address the assembled officials rather than me. "This is not a species that poses a meaningful threat to the Dominion. This is a species that stumbled too far from its own systems and got lost." Light laughter from the upper tiers. Comfortable laughter. the laughter of people who have not had to be afraid of anything in a very long time. I let it run its course. I stood on the platform and let the laughter move through the room and fade. I did not shift my weight. I did not look at the floor. I watched Thriel. When the room was quiet again, I spoke. "You are right." Thriel blinked. He had not expected agreement. Humanity spent centuries fighting itself. We were extremely good at it. We developed weapons capable of ending cities, then weapons capable of ending regions, then weapons capable of making portions of our planet uninhabitable for generations. I paused. We fought over land, over resources, over ideology, over things that seem completely pointless when you look back at them from a distance. We nearly destroyed ourselves more than once. The chamber was very quiet now. And then we stopped. I let that sit for exactly 3 seconds. Not because we became peaceful, because we got tired of losing things we had built. We learned, very slowly and at great cost, that destruction is easy and construction is hard, and we decided we preferred the harder thing. I looked up at the cameras. We took everything we had learned about how to fight each other, all of that history, all of those strategies and adaptations and hard-won lessons, and we pointed it outward, toward space, toward expansion, toward the things out there that were not us. I looked at Thriel. You asked me to describe what humanity has achieved. We have colonized over 300 worlds in 400 years. We have established self-sustaining habitats in 19 star systems. We have mapped more of the outer regions than any other species in this chamber, because we do not stop. We do not wait. We do not stay where we are told to stay. I paused. We go further. That is what we do. That is what we have always done. The speaker shuffled his papers. He asked the next prepared question, but his voice was slightly different now, less certain. What does humanity want from the wider galaxy? I thought about that for a moment. It was actually a good question. The same things we have always wanted: room to grow, the ability to choose our own direction, the knowledge that what we build will not be taken from us. I looked around the chamber slowly. We are not interested in conquest, but we are deeply, permanently, fundamentally opposed to being told what we are allowed to have. Another murmur. This one was not contemptuous, it was uncertain. Thriel stepped forward again. He was regaining his composure, settling back into authority. And yet here you are, one old man alone, captured in a broken ship, presenting no threat to anyone. He spread his hands slightly. If humanity is everything you describe, why did they not come for you? They do not know I am here yet. I paused, held his gaze for a moment that stretched just a little longer than was comfortable for either of us. And when they find out, I let the sentence hang. That, Commander, is precisely what I want to talk about. Thriel did not know it yet, but the broadcast had already changed. What had started as a demonstration of Dominion supremacy was becoming something else. I could see it in the posture of the officials in the upper tiers, in the way the camera operators had stopped panning the room and were holding steady on my face. The 47 systems watching were not laughing anymore. They were listening. And I had not yet said the thing I had been saving since the moment I first saw the live feed indicators light up above the chamber doors. I would like some water, I said. The request surprised everyone, including the speaker, who gestured for it almost reflexively. A guard brought a container and set it on the edge of the platform. I drank slowly, deliberately. Not because I was very thirsty, though I was, but because I needed 30 seconds to arrange my next words in exactly the right order. I set the container down. I looked at Thriel. I looked at the cameras. I thought about every person I had ever known who came from the kind of history that shaped a species. I thought about the Survey Corps pilot who had patched a hull breach with her own equipment belt and flown 14 hours on backup oxygen to bring her crew home. I thought about the CDF officer who had held a station perimeter alone for 6 days because the relief fleet was delayed and someone had to. I thought about the engineers on Titan who worked triple shifts when it mattered and complained about the coffee and kept building regardless. I thought about all of it. Then I spoke. Commander Thriel, you have shown me your ship. You have shown me your chamber and your officials and your broadcast reach. You have shown me everything you want me to see. I paused. Now I am going to tell you something you did not know you needed to hear. The room was silent enough that I could hear the soft hum of the camera systems. Humanity will not negotiate from captivity. We do not recognize your authority over our people, our worlds, or our space. We do not accept the framing of this proceeding as legitimate. I kept my voice level, not angry, factual. And if the V3 Dominion moves against a single human colony, a single station, a single vessel flying our flag, we will not send a protest. We will not file a diplomatic objection. We will not ask permission from anyone in this room or anywhere else. I straightened my spine. Then humanity will bring you war. 7 words. I said them the way you state a fact about physics, the way you describe what a star does when its fuel runs out. No fury in it, no performance. Just the calm, bone-deep certainty of someone who knows exactly what they are saying and does not need anyone to believe them, because believing or not believing will not change what happens. The chamber did not explode into noise. It did something worse. It went completely, absolutely silent. Thriel stared at me. In 30 years of facing difficult things, I had become fairly good at reading faces, even alien ones. What I saw in his face was not rage. It was something more unsettling than that. He was calculating. And somewhere in that calculation, something had shifted. One of the senior officials in the upper tier leaned toward another and spoke quietly. A third one activated something on their console. The broadcast indicators above the doors were still green, still live, 47 systems still watching. A single guard shifted his weight near the wall to my left. His hand moved toward his sidearm, and then stopped, because no order had been given and he did not know what order was coming. Thriel looked at me for a long time. Then he turned to the assembly and said, in a voice that was very carefully controlled, "This proceeding is recessed." He walked out of the chamber. He did not look at me again. I stood on the platform in the enormous silent room with the cameras still running, and I waited calmly, because I had said what I came to say. And now the next part was going to happen whether anyone in this room was ready for it or not. Somewhere out there, in 47 systems, someone with access to a communication relay was already sending a message. And at the end of that relay chain, somewhere near human space, someone was going to read 7 words and start making calls. The dark between stars is not empty. It is full of things that have been placed there carefully, quietly, without announcement, by a species that learned a very long time ago that the best defense is the one your enemy does not see coming until it is already in position. I sat back down on the platform. I waited. 3 days later, the first V3 scouting wing entered the Kepler corridor and disappeared. No signal, no debris field, no distress call, just silence where there had been 6 armed vessels traveling in tight formation. I know this because Thriel told me himself. He came to my cell on the 4th day after the broadcast, at an hour when the corridor lights were dimmed to the low cycle that served as night on the sovereign reach. He did not bring officers. He did not bring ceremony. He came alone, which told me more than anything he said. He stood outside the composite wall and looked at me. I was reading. They had given me a data pad with approved content, survey charts and species histories with anything relevant to human capability carefully removed. I had been reading the survey charts. Old habits. The Kepler wing has not responded to any communication in 72 hours, he said. I know. He looked at me carefully. You said humanity did not know you were captured. They did not. When I said that, it was true. I set the data pad down. The broadcast changed things. A long pause. They responded to the broadcast. They were watching. We watch a lot of things. The Survey Corps puts listening posts in places that are easy to miss if you do not know where to look. Someone on one of those posts saw my face on a Dominion frequency and made a call. Thriel was quiet for a moment. One scouting wing does not constitute a military event. It could be equipment failure, navigation error, a corridor anomaly. It could be, I agreed, but you do not think so. I leaned back on my bench. Commander, I spent 31 years in deep space. I have seen what equipment failure looks like. 6 ships do not all fail simultaneously in a mapped transit corridor with no environmental hazards and no prior warning signs. I paused. And the Kepler corridor is not some unmarked stretch of empty space. It is a primary approach lane into what the Dominion has classified as the human frontier zone. It was chosen as a route for a reason. Thriel's plating caught the dim light. He was very still. You are saying your people were waiting. I am saying we have had listening posts in that corridor for 11 years. We know its traffic patterns. We know its timing windows. And we know exactly what a Dominion formation looks like on a long-range scanner. He moved closer to the wall. Not in a threatening way, in the way of a person who wants to hear more clearly, even though they are not certain they want to hear what is coming. How is that possible? You have been charted as a developing interstellar species. Your colonization window is less than 400 years. You should not have the infrastructure to what plan ahead? I stood up from my bench. I walked to the wall and stood on my side of it, an arm's length from him. I am going to tell you something, Commander, and I want you to understand that I am not saying it to threaten you. I am saying it because I think you are a capable commander who has been given a very incomplete picture of what you are dealing with, and incomplete pictures get people hurt. He said nothing. He waited. Humanity does not fight in straight lines. We do not mass our forces at a front and push. We never have. Our entire military history, going back to the first conflicts on our home world, is built around the same core idea. You make it so expensive, so exhausting, so unrelenting for the enemy to continue that they stop. Not because you defeated them in a decisive moment, because they looked at what was ahead of them and decided it was not worth it. I let that land. We call it attrition. It is not elegant. It is not clean. It does not make good stories about glorious battles, but it works. We have tested it against ourselves for thousands of years, and we brought all of that knowledge with us when we went to the stars. Thriel's voice was quieter than it had been. The Kepler wing. Probably not gone, probably disabled and adrift. We prefer to send messages rather than destroy when we have the choice. Destruction ends conversations. A disabled ship is a data point. I paused. The message is, you came through our door without knocking, we noticed, and we can do this again. He turned away from the wall, walked 3 steps toward the corridor and stopped with his back to me. The second wing was larger, 20 vessels. They entered the corridor 6 hours after the first. I felt something cold move through me, not fear, recognition. 14 returned, he said. The other 6 have not. I breathed out slowly. 20 vessels was not a scouting probe. 20 vessels was a demonstration of force, sent after the first wing went silent, meant to push through whatever was waiting in the corridor and establish that the Dominion did not back down, and 6 of them had not come back. This was not a message anymore. Commander, I said. He turned. The 6 that did not return, were they destroyed or missing? He looked at me for a long moment. The 14 that came back are reporting navigational interference and weapons system disruption. They lost contact with the 6 during a communications blackout window. Then they are probably alive, and someone is talking to them right now. His expression shifted. Talking. We take prisoners, we always have, and then someone sits with them and explains the situation very carefully. I held his gaze. Because the point is not to destroy your ships. The point is for your crews to go home and tell everyone what it was like in that corridor, what they felt, what they saw, what they were told. I paused. Word travels faster than ships. Thriel stood very still in the dim corridor light. He was a powerful being by any measure. His species had dominated this region of space for 4 centuries. The V3 dominion covered more systems than any other governing body in the known galaxy. And he was standing in the corridor of his flagship at an off hour, having a quiet conversation with an old human prisoner. Because he had sent 40 vessels into a transit corridor, and 17 of them were either missing or damaged. You said, he began slowly, that you were a survey pilot. I was. Not a military strategist. No, but I grew up in a military family. I served 6 years, and I have lived long enough to understand how my people think. I leaned against the wall on my side. We are not complicated, Commander. We are stubborn. We protect what we have built. And we do not leave our people behind. I looked at him. Every human pilot in that corridor was someone's son or daughter or parent or best friend. Someone on a station somewhere is tracking their beacon, and they know where you came from. Thriel said nothing. This is the part where the math changes, because up to this point you were running a calculation based on a certain picture of humanity. One old man in a broken ship, a scattered species, internal divisions, limited reach. I paused. But the math you are running now is different, because the ships that went into that corridor did not come back whole, and you do not fully understand why, and that uncertainty is its own kind of weight. He looked at me. How do we end this? And there it was, not an order, not a declaration. A question from a commander who had come alone to a prisoner's cell at a dim hour, and was speaking quietly, because he did not want his officers to see him uncertain. I felt no satisfaction in it, only the particular tiredness that comes from being right about something you wished you were wrong about. You open a channel, a real one, not a broadcast, not a proceeding designed to show your citizens how small we are, a direct communication, my people to yours, equal parties at a table. You acknowledge that this vessel is in disputed space without authorization. And you release me with a formal written record of the communication, so that my government has documentation of what has been said and agreed. And if we do that, then humanity has something to work with. We are not unreasonable people. We are difficult people, which is different. Give us something real and we engage with it seriously. Thriel looked at the wall between us, then he looked at me. I will need time. You have it, but I would not take too long. Your next fleet movement will be watched as carefully as the last one, and the people watching it will not wait for my advice before they respond. He left without saying anything else. I went back to my bench. I picked up the data pad. I did not actually read anything on it for a long time. Somewhere in the Kepler corridor, 6 V3 crews were sitting in darkened ships, talking to human officers who were explaining things carefully and politely. Because that is how we do it when we have the advantage and we want it to last. Elsewhere, in the 14 ships that had returned, crews were filing reports that would travel up the Dominion chain of command. And those reports would land on desks and appear on screens and be read by beings who had, until very recently, considered humanity a minor and manageable situation. Those beings were revising their calculations. And somewhere in human space, on a station or a colony or a defense platform, a coordinator was sitting in front of a communications console, watching a screen, waiting to hear what an old survey pilot was going to do next. I turned off the data pad and lay back on the bench and closed my eyes. I was tired. Genuinely, deeply tired, the kind that comes from carrying something important for too long without being able to set it down. But I was not done, not yet. On the morning of the 6th day, the door opened. Not a guard, a young communications officer, barely old enough for the rank markings on her collar, standing in the corridor with an expression she was working very hard to keep professional. "The commander requests your presence in the communication suite," she said. I stood up. I rolled my shoulders. My back ached from the bench, which had not been designed for human spines, and my left knee had been complaining since day 2. I picked up nothing because there was nothing to pick up. "Lead the way," I said. She did. The corridor was different at this hour, or perhaps it was a different quality of attention. The soldiers we passed did not look through me this time. They looked at me. Some of them looked away quickly. One of them, a large one near a junction point, held my gaze for a moment with an expression I could not entirely read, but which contained something that might have been respect or might have been weariness, which in this context amounted to the same thing. The communication suite was at the forward section of the ship. A wide room, all screens and console stations, with 3 large display panels on the far wall and a long central table that had clearly been set up recently. The chairs around it were mismatched in a way that suggested someone had gathered them quickly from different parts of the ship. Thriel stood at the head of the table. 4 senior officers flanked him. On the central display panel, a connection indicator showed an active channel, and on the screen, looking back at me, was a face I recognized. Admiral June Calloway, 61 years old, my commanding officer during my last 2 years in the CDF before I transferred to survey work. She was sitting in what I recognized as the communications room on the Colonial Assembly platform above Kepler Station, in her uniform, with 2 aides visible in the background. She looked at me for exactly 1 second, with an expression that said everything it needed to say, without saying any of it out loud. Then she looked at Thriel. "Commander, thank you for arranging this." Thriel inclined his head. He gestured to the chair nearest me, indicating I should sit. I sat. "Captain Grant," June said. "Admiral," I said, "good to see you." "Likewise." Her tone meant we are going to have a very long conversation later, and it is going to be detailed and I have questions, but not right now. What followed was 4 hours of the most careful, precise, exhausting conversation I have ever sat through. June and Thriel went back and forth through every element. The question of sovereignty over the Outer Veil region. The legal status of my capture under both Dominion and Colonial Assembly frameworks. The matter of the vessels in the Kepler corridor. The terms under which those crews would be returned. The broader question of what the Dominion's presence near human frontier space would mean going forward. June was extraordinary. She had always been extraordinary. She asked questions that seemed simple and were not. She agreed to things that appeared significant and cost nothing. She held firm on the things that mattered without ever raising her voice or reducing any statement to a threat, because the threats had already been made by the situation itself. And she was wise enough to know that you do not need to say a thing twice when the other party has already understood it. Thriel was not without skill. He was a capable negotiator, and he understood that his position had changed. He did not pretend otherwise. That earned him a measure of my respect that his authority had not. At the end of 4 hours there was a framework, not a treaty, not yet, but a framework, which meant there was a process, and a process meant both sides had decided to keep talking instead of doing the other thing. June looked at me near the end of the session. "Captain Grant, do you require medical assistance?" "I require coffee, but I assume that is not available." Thriel spoke before June could respond. "We will arrange something." 30 minutes later, I was holding a container of something warm and dark that was not coffee, but was clearly an attempt at it. I found that genuinely moving in a way I did not have words for. The young communications officer who had brought me to the room had stayed through the whole session. She was at a console in the corner, logging the exchange. Near the end, when the formal parts were concluded and both parties were waiting for their respective aides to compile the documentation, she looked over at me with that carefully professional expression. I gave her a small nod. She looked back at her console quickly, but I saw the edge of something in her expression before she turned. Not the contempt of the early days, not amusement, something more like the look a person gets when they have seen something they did not expect to see and are still deciding what to do with it. I understood it. I had walked into this ship as a curiosity, a joke, a piece of proof that humanity was small and scattered and did not matter. I was walking out as a data point of a different kind. The escort came 2 hours after the documentation was complete. My light chain had been removed at the start of the communication session and not replaced. I was walked to the ship's secondary bay, where a courier vessel of human registry was docked under a temporary access agreement that had been one of June's quiet early wins in the negotiation. The bay was nearly empty, a few maintenance crew in the distance. Thriel himself was not there. He had duties, and we had said what needed to be said. But as I reached the courier's access hatch, I heard steps behind me. I turned. It was the young communications officer. She held out a small sealed case. Inside, when I checked later, was a copy of the full session log, signed with the commander's administrative mark. "The commander said you should have a complete record," she said. "Thank him for the thought," I paused, "and tell him I considered my words. Tell him I hope the next time our species are in the same room there is no chain on the table." She held very still for a moment. Then she said, "I will tell him." I stepped through the hatch. The courier was a 2-person vessel with a competent pilot named Owen, who had the good sense not to ask me anything until we were well clear of the sovereign reach. Then he handed me a sealed packet from June's office, which contained a mission debrief form, a medical assessment request, and a handwritten note that said, in June's precise handwriting, "You held the broadcast open for 4 minutes after you said it. Did you plan that? Of course you planned that. We will talk." I folded the note and put it in my chest pocket. The stars outside the courier's small window were the same stars they had always been, cold, distant, indifferent to the small arguments of small beings traveling between them. I had spent 31 years among those stars, charting the ones nobody had bothered to look at carefully, filing reports that went into databases most people would never read. You see things in that kind of work that change the way you understand distance. Not just physical distance, the light years between one point and another, but the distance between what a species believes about itself and what it actually is. Between the story an empire tells about its own permanence and the reality that everything eventually shifts. The V3 Dominion had existed for 4 centuries. That was a long time by most standards. But humanity had been fighting and building and losing everything and starting again for far longer than that. And we had learned things in that long, difficult school that you simply cannot learn any other way. You learn that size is not the same as strength. You learn that certainty is not the same as being right. You learn that the most dangerous being in any room is not the loudest one, or the largest one, or the one with the most visible weapons. It is the quiet one in the corner who has already counted everything and is waiting for the right moment. I leaned back in the courier's seat and felt the engine hum through the frame. I looked at the stars and breathed air that did not smell like a V3 prison ship. Somewhere behind me, 47 systems were replaying 7 words on every available channel. Somewhere in the Kepler corridor, 6 V3 crews were beginning the long process of understanding what had happened to them and why. Somewhere in the assembly halls of the Dominion, officials who had laughed at the old man in the glass cage were sitting with their advisors, and asking questions that were harder to answer than they had been a week ago. And June Calloway was on a platform above Kepler Station, reading session logs and making notes, and building the next step out of the materials this one had left behind. I closed my eyes. The thing about being old, genuinely old, the kind of old that comes from having lived hard in difficult places for a very long time, is that you stop being afraid of things that are merely large. You have seen large things fail. You have seen small things outlast them. You have lived long enough to know that the future does not belong to the species with the biggest ships or the most controlled systems. It belongs to the ones that refuse to stop. I stepped through the courier hatch, rolled my shoulders one last time, cracked my thumb twice out of habit. Owen didn't flinch. He just handed me the packet. Some gestures lose their weight when you're no longer surrounded by people who should fear them. And some gestures gain new weight when you realize you've been performing for an empty room. Owen brought the courier up to transit speed, and the stars ahead shifted with the familiar pull of faster-than-light approach. And for the first time in 8 days, I smiled without any calculation behind it at all. We were going home. Humanity was still here. And we were not done yet, not even close. The stars stretched on ahead of us, patient and cold, and full of the dark spaces between them where no one had looked carefully yet.